Good afternoon, everyone. I want to do something a little more light-hearted than talking to you about ancient history. This one was actually inspired by Mary. If you could bring it up, Tim. I am slightly biased because geese are one of my favourite animals, I'll admit. And this photo was taken just down by our house by the canal. So it's a very local goose. And it was last year when all the kids were out, which was very cute as well. So we know from the scriptures, this one from Job, there's a couple like this. Who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the fowls of heaven? And I like these ones where we look at just a little aspect of creation and the Lord just gives us so many lessons from it. And it's just, sometimes it's little details, things that might go, it might not be the most obvious, but they can be very profound lessons. And one thing I was quite surprised when I was looking on the internet is the number of sites I saw, for instance, LinkedIn or job sites, or even I found a Christian presentation somewhere, which I haven't stolen, by the way, but it was like, 5 lessons you can learn from geese, and it made me quite happy, should we say. So just first of all, I wanted to talk about flight. This picture doesn't look like much, but it's just to sort of demonstrate and understand how flight works, really, because humans are not built for it at all. So it can be very difficult for us to understand how it works, and obviously humans have taken thousands of years to create something that can fly ourselves. So the principle, it's the same effect when you've got a hose and you're, say, watering plants, and there's an amount of water that needs to get through the hose, and when you put your finger over the end of it, you've blocked up the end, so there's less space, but the same amount of water has to get through. So what you notice is it comes out a lot faster. And that is actually the principle that we see here. So the wing of a bird is shaped perfectly so that when it's in the air currents, underneath the wing, the air just goes as normal, but on the top of it, the wing squashes the air current, so it has to go over the top of it much faster. And what happens with that is it means the air bunches up more underneath the wing, and it's more spread out on top. So because of that, it's able to generate lift from the more air underneath, and so it's able to stay up in the air. And of course, we noticed as well when we see birds take off, their body, their entire bodies, their feathers, their wings, their entire structure is perfectly built. Some might say conveniently designed, of course. So just the shape of the wings, the way they move it so that they flap, and sort of the angles of everything as well. It's so well engineered perfectly to do the thing that it's designed for. Even, for instance, when you look at the tail fins, for instance, they have to be perfect. So when a bird is flying, it needs to have a certain speed to be able to get that lift as well, often. Some birds can take off from the ground, which is even more impressive. Some can't quite do that, so they need to be higher up, and then when they drop and they've got their wings out and they're flapping, by dropping they get the speed enough to then get the lift. So there are actually some birds which need to live very high up, because if they come down to the ground, then they can never reach their home again, which is quite sad. But of course, when you look at man's attempts at trying to fly, there's a lot of weird and wonderful images you see. Often propellers and wings. And what you notice is most of these come from people looking at animals and thinking, how could I design something that mimics what that does? For instance, in the bottom right, that was an example of someone designing a plane where the wings actually flap, because, of course, naturally people would think that that's how birds work, so we'll do something that works in the same way. But with all the materials and the background of science and engineering we have, I mean, can you imagine sitting on a plane where the wings are flapping? Like, it would all constantly be turbulent and everywhere. So, not to mention, of course, but if wings are flapping, it would probably wreck apart the middle of the plane, because, again, the actual structure of a bird is so perfect and strong that it can actually hold itself together. So the modern design for the aircraft, of course, is what we see here. And again, everything's designed so perfectly, but to the spec of how birds work. So the wings are shaped and designed off the wings of a bird. Even, for instance, the tail fins, so the ones that go flat at the back and then the vertical one, because they've done so many tests when they were building these things to begin with. So, for instance, even without the vertical tail fin at the back, if you got rid of that, the whole aircraft would go into a tailspin, because it needs to have air pushing against it on both sides to make it actually fly in a straight line. But one thing we still haven't been able to perfect, of course, because the need for having a runway is so you can get up to that initial speed to even be able to take off at all. Apart from a helicopter, which is a completely different design, but that's also copied off things like insects. We have not been able to create any kind of aircraft that can just take off stationary. So just going back to Geese specifically, because as Mary very well knows, geese fly in this giant V formation in the sky. And when you start to look at the science as to why they do that as well. So not only does a bird able to lift itself, but when it flaps its wings, the currents behind it as well are affected. So you get this sort of spiral effect that you can see on the image, where the air is going round in circles. And because of that, it means that if you are behind the wings at a certain angle and a certain distance, it means you get extra lift. So you're not just flying yourself, but the person in front of you is actually helping you fly even more. And apparently, when geese all work together in this formation, I've heard it said that they can get places up to 70% faster than if they're just working on their own. So we're all very well aware of this formation, the perfect V. Again, they are designed, and their instinct is so much that they can perfectly recognize exactly the distances they need to be from each other, and how to work together using that. So when they're in the air, and for instance, you see people change round, a big part of that is because different places in the structure take different amounts of effort. And of course, the goose that is right out in the front the center of the V, that is the leader of the pack, and essentially the person who has to do the most of the work, because they're the only ones which are not helped by the ones in front of them. And I think this in itself actually is quite an important lesson on leadership. Just have a gander at a couple of scriptures here. The Bible very much encourages us to pray for our leaders. I know, I'm sure anyone who has been a pastor or a leader in the church can attest to that it's not an easy job. Not saying that from experience, but I think there's enough understanding there to be able to see that. So just a couple I've mentioned here. 1 Timothy chapter 3, it says, "This is a true saying, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behaviour, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, no greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that rules well in his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God?" And Hebrews 13, "Remember them which have rule over you, who have spoken unto the word of God, whose faith follow, considering the end of their conversation." The way it reads, it's almost putting this particular emphasis on the leader must have a specific virtue almost. Like a lot of these things, the whole congregation, of course, must aspire to. But it's like if you're a leader, there's even greater necessity to be that example. Just another example as well. This just to show how, yeah, there you go. Just the sort of teamwork nature of Geese, really. So as you can see, I was trying to find a better example of a picture here. But geese have this certain reputation, don't they, of being very angry. But I love this idea that they're all, in formation. They're all strictly in formation, and they're working as a team. And then one falls out of the pack, and they instantly react to it, and they get together and they help each other. I mean, it makes me wonder, because in a case like this where one might fall and it needs to go down to the ground and the other two follow it, how they're able to rejoin the rest of the formation if the one that's fallen is able to come back again. But I love the idea that they care for each other so much that two of them work with the one that's fallen. And of course, we know very well that the Bible speaks a lot of love. When Jesus is asked what is the greatest commandment, he speaks about loving God and then loving your neighbour as yourselves. And then in John 15, he issues a new commandment saying that ye love one another as I have loved you, which is the agape love of God, completely unconditional. Just another couple of scriptures as well. Romans 12, let love be without dissimulation, abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good, be kindly affectioned one to another, with brotherly love, in honour preferring one another. And then in Galatians 6, brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. That should say the law of Christ, not the law of Chris, if anyone's wondering. But actually, that one in Galatians 6 actually very much represents, I think, the two geese coming down to help the one that's maybe weak or at fault. In this case, obviously, it's different from being shot down. But the idea that if someone is maybe weak or at fault, that a couple of people in the church can get around them and guide them. Another thing that I thought was quite interesting was that apparently, because geese are very noisy in the air, aren't they? You can proper hear them when they're coming over, and they make a big show of themselves. But apparently, a big part of the reason why geese do honk like that is to offer some form of encouragement and moral support to the people in the front. So they're constantly like, go on, you can do it. I don't know how they test for this kind of thing, but I love the idea of it, because I found this kind of thing said on a lot of different places. This is one of the lessons you learn from geese. So I just love the idea that, as a team, again, they're going in this great formation, and they're constantly communicating with each other. They're constantly encouraging each other. And it's the kind of thing that just makes you think that's what the Church of God should be. It's just a perfect representation that God has given us in his creation of how the church should work. Another one, just go through a couple of ones more quickly. So geese apparently, this example, this picture, this doesn't even include geese. This includes a lot of different birds. But apparently the geese, they basically every year they go in exactly the same routes. So they don't just, this year they feel like, taking this scenic trip somewhere else. They teach each other exactly the best way to get to where they're going to migrate to. And apparently, again, it's not like, for instance, the goose that's in charge decides where they go. Every time the new generation comes in, or if they bring new geese into the group, the others will teach them where the group needs to go exactly. So they have these structures which they keep to. And again, that is a very good representation of the church needing to be well versed and very much keep the same patterns of how we preach the gospel, how we teach salvation. I've just put Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6 there. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not in thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. There's many scriptures you could pull out about this. For instance, in Matthew 6 or 7, where it talks about narrow is the way. Very scriptural principle that we understand exactly where we need to go, and we follow that as a group. Just finish off with a couple of slides now. I don't know if anyone saw this a few years ago. Apparently someone just photoed this goose randomly in the air, but they weren't really sure what it was doing, because it's basically flying upside down. And the way birds usually fly and the way they're designed, you wouldn't expect them to even be able to do that. But what like bird experts seem to think was basically this goose was just showing off. Um, and it made me think of like when you see these teenage lads going down the street and doing wheelies on their bikes, just basically because they look cool and because they want to show off how good they look. And that is basically this goose. But I think there's a sort of, I suppose, a bit of a scriptural principle of, as the church, we do things naturally and like normally, down to earth, really. We do a lot of things not to bring emphasis to any one individual and make ourselves look good, because at the end of the day, it's the Word of God which we are building up. And, His miracles, His signs, and I suppose in a sense it's like, don't be like this goose. I had to laugh as well, and I had to put this poster on. Because if you notice, it says London Underground at the bottom. They have got this goose warning poster, specifically level 5 goose warnings, which suggests they have a level 1 to 4 goose warning as well. I just wanted to bring this up because talking before about geese having a bit of a reputation about, being angry, about being violent. But at the same time, geese are very brave animals. They're very protective. They mate for life and they care a lot over their young. So, we walk down the canal quite a lot, and sometimes we bring the dog with us, and you'll just see these geese sitting on the side, and especially when they've got their kids with them, they'll just turn and hiss at you. They don't care how big you are. They just want to warn you off anyway. And I feel like I respect that, because some animals will just run away, but one that kind of stands up for itself. And again, I think it shows something how we can be as well, because we are commanded to bring the gospel with courage. So I just had to throw that one from Joshua 1 up there. Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither thou be dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee wherever you go. And then put one in Philippians 1. Only let your conversation be as it becomes with the gospel of Christ, that whether I come and see you or else be absent, I may hear of your affairs, that ye stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. And then I'll just finish on this one. A nice one about flight again. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. And of course, this is a reminder of what the Lord has waiting for us after this life and after this world. And I'm sure there's some literal and some metaphorical things we can pull out from this, because in Thessalonians it talks about how we'll be lifted up to meet the Lord in the air. But I was also thinking as well, because there's this idea of a bird's eye view, which is of course a very well-known saying. But it's almost like understanding perspective, because when you see something very close up, it can be hard to get the bigger picture. And for instance, when we're on the ground, there's a lot of things that you miss, but then when you're high up in the air and you can see everything for what it is, then you could see the clarity of it. And I do wonder if that's partly what God means from that as well. To almost give us that understanding and the wisdom of understanding what it's being like to see things from above. So yeah, I'll just leave it there.